the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical Psychology for Today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, voiced by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from Neglected Aspects of Sufi Study by Idries Shah. This audio has been made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. We are talking about a framework for new knowledge. This seems to me to imply that there is an interest on the part of non-Sufis to know what new knowledge there is and what the framework might be. But a Sufi will always say that your definition of new knowledge may not be his, or his may not be yours. We are here dealing with the phase and formulations of the human insight known as Sufism, but now I will try to indicate the Sufi's explanation of the course which the organizing of this path takes in virtually all human communities with similar institutions and expectations. For the purpose of illustration, we have to start somewhere, and I will start with the man or woman whom the Sufis call Insan al-Kamil, Insani Kamil, which means the completed human, though for some reason it is almost always translated into English and other Western languages as the perfect man. This realized individual, according to many Sufi authorities, is relieved of the constricting performance of various kinds of social behavior which were intended to help lead to realization. The position is roughly similar to that which obtains in etiquette. This has led to the Sufis being called heretics and apostates, and to the appearance of some large but untypical communities called bishara, lawless, and even to the distinction between the bishara and the bashara, those who observe the law. Many Sufis in Islamic countries, including some of the greatest ones like Hallaj 1,000 years ago and Rumi, who died in 1273, have said and written things which, in Islamic law, brand them as apostates. Ibn Arabi and other great teachers of the Sufis have said that a realized Sufi, exempted from repetitious observances because of his attainment, will, according to social circumstances, maintain their outward observance for the public good, or will be exonerated by legal decision, as often happens and still does, since it has been upheld by jurists that things said or done or not done in states different from customary consciousness cannot be judged by ordinary criteria. Islamic opinion legitimized the Sufis by means of this formula almost 1,000 years ago. So here we have this realized individual, perhaps behaving in an inexplicable, or at any rate, an often misunderstood manner. He may be put to death, as many were, including Hallaj in the 10th century, when bigotry overcame justice. He may acquire a great reputation. If this happens, people may seek to emulate him, primitively thinking that, for instance, the induction of the ecstatic experience of itself produces self-realization. Some of these imitators will be sincere, others will attempt to pretend to be mystics and Sufis. Both types may attract followers, and through deceit or faulty understanding, may establish schools and communities which, modern Western knowledge verifies, are most logically to be assessed as, at best, social groupings, whose participants not only claim and believe that theirs is a legitimate spiritual endeavor, but have, in a sense, a very restricted sense, a right to do so. If, after all, your sense of religion or higher things is at a level at which, say, circling around a totem makes everyone taking part quite certain that they are psychically elevated, this is indeed a religious and higher activity within the local definition, and that is that. Religion exists at many levels, as the Sufi classical tale of Moses and the shepherd pungently reminds us. But I would not like to say that either the imitation or the well-meant consolidation of a community forms a framework for knowledge, new or otherwise. The next stage is when, what, for lack of a better term, we might call an illuminate, having experienced the state of integration or completeness, and having been able to discern what restrains ordinary people from reaching it, constructs a teaching method designed to facilitate arrival at this state. Such people are those who are known as Sufi teachers. The technical terms most often used for the wise or realized ones are sheikh, Arabic, and pir, Persian, both denoting in this usage something like elder. The teacher is known in all Sufi circles as a murshid, director. The status of both pir, elder, and murshid, director, may be the same, but not all elders are directors, teachers, and conductors of the way. The director establishes his rule. Historically, this rule is easily seen to coincide with the social situation and mentality of the people among whom the teacher works, and is authoritatively described as such, as by Arabi in the West and Hafiz in the East in Iran. His community need not be concentrated in one place, or use ecstatogenic methods, or even have regular or frequent meetings. His basic watchwords include, "Speak to everyone in accordance with his understanding," and "the phenomenal is the bridge to the real." Such teachers may or may not be publicly known, and may have very few students, and from time to time none at all. The vast number of types of allegedly Sufi schools, and the seeming differences between their observances are due to two factors. The first is that each teacher may establish a separate rule or system, which corresponds with both his own individuality and the surrounding facts of his time and place. The second is when this director is dead, and the participants in what he had established as an ongoing and flexible rule feel a need of stabilization, or rather the desire for it, with the removal of the teacher as its center of gravity. This latter stabilization is often the adoption of specific exercises, formerly used in a limited way, as technical instruments under special circumstances as the new binding force. Tools have become chains. Everyone now does these exercises, and a near indissoluble vortex is formed. We now have a cult, not a school. Anthropologists, sociologists, historians, and other specialists, as well as reasonably well-informed laypeople, will recognize the pattern. The highly organized phase will either succeed the central figure or will have been adopted from his initial procedures, and probably constitute the low-level application of discipline or grouping which takes place at the outset of the teaching course. This deterioration, which has great survival value, might be likened to laboratory assistants maintaining chemistry on a do-it-yourself basis by repeatedly washing test tubes. Few people realize, though the historical evidence is freely available, that none of the organization of the so-called Sufi orders can be traced to their putative founders, themselves undeniably major teachers. Many of the followers who succeed Sufi teachers tend to be people who, lacking the personality requirements which mark a leader, find, consciously or otherwise, that they can stabilize the group by systematic ideas, intellectuality, or action and experience, emotion-based behavior. Such systematization, which always includes a great deal of telescoping and simplistic formulation, helps to ensure the longer life of the group. It no longer is in great danger of dying with the leader here already being an imitator of the founder. But as Sufis have observed in this connection, the essential element had died with the teacher. An Urdu proverb underlines the need to remember the objective, not the experience. Chalti ka chiz ka naam gari hai. That which moves may be called a cart. This is not to say that the residues of the teaching, the formulae and procedures, the literature and the sayings of the teachers and so on are of no use. But it does mean that, as with a cargo cult, even those who have seen and to an extent taken part in a thing may be wildly at sea when it comes to keeping its inner reality going. The Sufis tend not to worry too much about this. Those who need social satisfactions from something will not be prevented from getting them. For the rest, the phrase, "the secret preserves itself," is enough. In organic life, a nutrient becomes a compost and continues life as a fertilizer. In the eyes of the Sufis, literature, for instance, which has not taken effect as a nutrient, conducing to the learning, is admired instead, and thus functions as compost. I might here add a further reason for the proliferation of imitation Sufi cults. People want to be loved, and we don't always seem to love them. We sort out the real learners from the would-be consumers, and in the process become great innovators. If the Russians say that Popov invented radio, well, we invented aversion therapy. This is the best way to get rid of the superficialists. So the framework is local to the culture, limited to the time, tailored for the people. The recognition by some of the greatest Sufis of the relationship between all mystical experience, irrespective of its religious colouring, is one of the things which many people have been unable to stomach. Most people, however, who have been prepared to give time and effort to understanding this seeming paradox, have indeed been able to do so, unless they have psychological needs which prevent it. I cannot improve on the material on this subject which has been left by Rumi, Shabistari, Hujwiri, and Ibn Arabi, and many others. Indeed, I have quoted it extensively in several books, which are very widely bought and studied. I think that it is enough to say that their arguments, having prevailed in what was often a far more oppressive and less well-informed atmosphere than we have today, still hold good and need only be invoked. In the largely Western-oriented culture which covers so much of the world today, I find a problem in the multiplicity of interests and opinions which cause people to take an interest in Sufism. People have, it is true, discovered with surprise that Sufi texts contain materials which they thought were modern scientific discoveries. This only has to be said for its attraction to become instantly apparent. Some people have tried everything else, and we are in a period when, through sheer novelty value, Sufism has an attraction for a lot of people. The puerile nature of many Eastern cults, as nowadays practiced, has also driven some Western thinkers to Sufism. They should remember that cultic forms of Sufism are not the real study. Some people, following the contemporary idea of the expansion of human consciousness, feel that if they look into this phenomenon in our terms, they may find clues or methods which might enable them to increase perceptions beyond the limitations which they have decided to be undesirable to them. I remember Robert Graves annoying a lot of dons at Oxford when, elected professor of poetry there, he said, "You may not be able to get much out of me. Although I am a poet, a fish is not always the best authority on fish." "But," objected one of the scholars, "you are the greatest poet of the English language." "Be that as it may," said Robert, "but I can only teach you if your interest in poetry is of the same kind as mine." Some of the people there knew what he meant, but others asked for further definitions, and there were mutterings of hair-splitting. Sufis have always maintained that only Sufis understand other Sufis fully, and also that the initial or low-level study of Sufism may be motivated by unsufic ambitions. They may, and do often heartily, respect the approaches and contributions of good scholars. But I am quite sure, and in this I do not differ from Sufi tradition, that just as science is carried out by its own methods and with its own tools, so is Sufism. That just as intellect gives help in approaching what it can understand, and emotion has its role, so does the would-be student of Sufism have to be prepared for this study. Sufism cannot be assessed or analysed or partially used to get to the bottom of it, though its byproducts are socially and psychologically more than just useful. The reason why you cannot penetrate to the core of Sufism and work backwards is that, as it were, this has already been tried, and the Sufis' methods and being are such that, to borrow words from another level, the research has already all been done. The other day, a contemporary Sufi referred to this question with the words, "If you want to reinvent the wheel, no engineer will help you. If you want to study applications of engineering, he may be able to help you. But only if you are talking the same language. It is the same with Sufis." He quoted the Persian phrase for this, "Azmuda ra azmudan jal ast." To seek to test the tested is ignorance. This podcast is copyright 2018, the Idries Shah Foundation.